this attack by the US and Israel on Iran, which was a breach of the UN Charter, a breach of international law, and yet what New Zealand managed to do was to put out a release that condemned Iran. There's simply a moral question here, Are we going to stand with humanity, or are we going to stand with the billionaires, with their determination to control the world? The pressure must come from the ground up. It has to come from ordinary people working together. That is what will make a change.
We'll be fine. We'll be fine. So kia ora koutou, welcome to what is probably just a one-off special for PSNA Ōtautahi, talking about the upcoming No More Wars March and Rally, which is part of a national day of action throughout Aotearoa in response particularly to the the attack against Iran. So I'm joined here today by someone who needs no introduction. It's John Minto, who has been a stalwart of anti-racist campaigning and many other causes for decades now. So, John, this day of action, it came out of, I believe, a meeting in Tāmaki, Makaurau that was in response to the attacks on Iran. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think it's come about because, there's been a growing feeling, I think, right around the country that we need to rebuild a strong anti-war movement in this country, and I think the US-Israeli attack on Iran in the middle of negotiations, absolutely outrageous at every level. That's what has sparked this idea of a national day of action. So this is it's early days in a sense for this very broad coalition, but I think we'll get off to a good start this weekend, and then it'll be a matter of building the network around the country after that.
So is the idea that it would be something like Stop the Wars UK, sort of something that is a continuous presence as different global events unfold?
Yeah, well, I think it'll be part of a movement where you have lots of different organisations coming together, and each organisation does its own thing. But hopefully, on say a national day of action, we all take action, and it looks different in different communities around the country, but it's all with that basic focus of no more wars. That what we're witnessing now are the deliberate announcement of war crimes before those war crimes occur. And we've got our politicians, Western politicians, and including politicians around most of the world, who are not calling out the US and Israel as the war criminal states which they are. So, in the past, for example, when the US has gone into other wars, invasions, it hasn't been the governments of the world which have stopped that. It's always been the people of the world that have, through mass mobilizations, international mobilizations. And it's you could argue at one hand, well, it's not a good thing that our government should be doing this, and of course they should. But most of our governments have been sort of bought and sold long before we get the chance to vote in elections. So it really comes down to civil society groups saying absolutely no, not in our name. We will not support this, and we will organise to stop it.
So now, effectively the US has joined Israel in no longer even having a fig leaf of legality. And the response from governments, such as the European governments, has been to note that it's illegal, but not to even oppose it. And we had the same here, where we actually had condemnation of Iran's response to an act of aggression, which is effectively an endorsement of the aggressor's actions. So what role do you think, how do we build up the pressure on the government to actually stick to what it's supposed to do?
Well, that's a really good question for this country. Yeah, we did see the most astonishing release come out from the government after this sort of, this attack by the US and Israel on Iran, which was a breach of the UN Charter, a breach of international law. And yet, what New Zealand managed to do was to put out a release that condemned Iran for attacking US bases across the Middle East in response to this massive attack, which they were facing themselves. So here was New Zealand, sort of the hypocritical twisting and turning to try and blame the victim in this case, rather than blame the aggressors. So when you've got that context, we have to, again, it comes down to civil society groups to call out what the government's been doing. And I think in New Zealand, the situation we have is with our coalition government is that National and ACT have contracted out foreign affairs to New Zealand First, which is probably the most reactionary part of this coalition government. And so we've got a Minister of Foreign Affairs who is playing to an audience of about 10% of this country, people who support Israel, support the US no matter what, rather than representing the country as a whole. And if we look back through to the 50 years ago, when New Zealand developed an independent foreign policy, one which was strongly opposed by the US and strongly opposed by Winston Peters and strongly opposed by Judith Collins, our Minister of Defence, who's just been replaced in that role. What I think Winston Peters is doing now is using this opportunity to really destroy New Zealand's independent foreign policy and link us in tightly to the US orbit. That's where Winston Peters is comfortable. That's where New Zealand First is comfortable, but that is not what the majority of New Zealanders want. We don't want to be aligned to any major powers. We want to be independent so that we can speak out in a principled way against all breaches of international law, not just ones which the US condemns.
Yes, and so in building a coalition, a movement, bringing people together under an umbrella, hopefully that will cohere more public sentiment and translate it into something that can apply pressure to these people, I would imagine. Because I don't know if you would agree, but the public sentiment seems to be on our side, but people are not mobilized. So is this maybe a way of moving towards getting more of a mass mobilization so that we have more pressure on the government?
Yeah, I think it is. We have had on the issue of Palestine over the last 2.5 years, we've had an incredible outpouring from New Zealanders from every walk of life, from every sector, utterly appalled at what Israel is doing, acknowledging it is a genocide which is happening before our eyes, live streamed genocide, and our government not doing anything. So, we have had that, and what the public opinion polls that we've conducted show, these are reputable organisations that have conducted these polls, what they show is that for New Zealanders who give an opinion about the Middle East, 2-1, people are saying we want sanctions against Israel. We want New Zealand to recognise a Palestinian state. So our government is way offside with where the public of New Zealand is. And as I said before, we've got a government which is effectively representing 10% of New Zealanders rather than the majority of people here who want us to take action in a principled way against Israel and call out the war crimes that the US has just announced today, which it's going to conduct within the next few days.
In fact, even threatening those sorts of actions is in itself a war crime.
Yeah,
To add
absolutely.
to the many, many, many war crimes that the US commits regularly
Yep.
on live on
Oh
live
no, they
television.
have. I mean, the US has a utterly horrendous record going back to its very foundation. You know, the
Mm.
murder of the the murder of 4 million indigenous people in North America, the
Mm.
the millions of millions of black people from Africa coming in, to being brought into America as slaves, and those people built the American economy into what it is now. America's got an appalling history, and of course, since international law came to the fore after the Second World War, I think the US has bombed over 50 countries, and most of those, if not all of them, would be war crimes under international law.
Jeffrey Sachs was sharing the figure that between 1971 and 2021, they killed 38 million people.
Yep, it
And
is.
if you think back to the fact that in 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. called the United States the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today.
Yep.
That was true then. It was true the decade before then. It's been true ever since as well. And the
Yes,
numbers, I think
yes,
people
it
don't
has, and
understand how brutal and the scale of their violence around the world, because they're all of these things are always isolated from each other and talked about as a different occasion. So
yeah,
yeah.
they are, and I think New Zealanders, like even today, New Zealanders will be appalled at Donald Trump, and they'll be saying, "Oh, if only we can get, if only the US will get rid of Donald Trump." But in fact, Donald Trump is not the problem. Donald Trump is simply saying out loud what American presidents have been doing all the way through, if we're talking about since the Second World War. So I think in that sense, Donald Trump is a breath of fresh air. He's being honest. When he assassinates people, when he invades, when he bombs, he doesn't say, "Oh, we're doing it for human rights. We're doing it for women's rights,"
Mm.
which is what most US presidents have done. He's simply saying we want their resources. We want control of their resources. We demand that they abide by the rules which we set, rather than anything to do with international law. So, and Obama, you have to remember Obama, who was welcomed by so many sort of liberal people in New Zealand into the White House, in fact, conducted more assassinations than any president before him. These targeted assassinations. So the American state is a warmongering state. It is a state which is determined to have full spectrum dominance of the world. They've moved slightly last year, and they're saying now they will accept a multipolar world. But in that multipolar world, the US is going to control everything. So I think the full spectrum dominance that we talk about is something which is still there as part of the American DNA.
Absolutely. And another thing about Trump is that I mean, he might be open, but he also becomes a lightning rod. And I think that serves a purpose as well. I see
Mm,
many, many people using the phrase Trump and Israel. Trump and Israel bombed Iran today. Trump and
yeah.
Israel bombed a school, as if the country of the United States has no role in it whatsoever. And
Yeah, and that's
he's
the
doing it.
danger. That's
Yeah.
always the danger. I mean, we see it here in New Zealand, where on all sorts of issues, um, we see people saying we need to change the government. We need to change the government. Well, to be really frank with you, I think if we had a Labour government in charge in New Zealand at the moment, not very much would be different. There would be more. Um, there would be more action to to call out the US and Israel, but there wouldn't be any effective pressure. We wouldn't see sanctions against Israel. other than minor technical sanctions, which the Labour Party so far have announced. So I think in all of these things, the change will only come when civil society groups mobilize and coordinate together and drive that change in ways that forces the government to act.
Yeah. And the first step in that may be that their membership have to force their leadership to nail their colours to the mast. So in NGOs, in unions and so forth, that
Yeah,
they choose a side and understand that we are in a moment where it is a matter of choosing sides.
it is
And
absolutely. You
it's
choose the side
really
of
it's historic
the
moment.
angels, or you choose the side
Yeah,
of the devils. I mean, I don't want to necessarily go down that track because it brings up other connotations. But the fact is, yeah, there's simply a moral question here. Are we going to stand with humanity, or are we going to stand with the billionaires, with their determination to control the world? Um, Human beings have an opportunity now, I think, where there is this massive rupture happening in the global order to get people centered policies around the world that will, you know, brush aside these elites that have been running things the way they have. So I hope that doesn't sound too airy fairy, but I think the the pressure must come from the ground up. It has to come from ordinary people working together. That is what will make a change. We won't make a change by necessarily electing a different government. If we're looking for the really fundamental changes, which we need to put the humanity on a different course, that will come from people. It won't come from governments.
yeah. And I think also it's maybe a time that we set aside our concerns about the way countries run their internal affairs
Yeah,
until we have a world of peace. I would
yeah,
look forward to living in a world where I can meaningfully get out and demonstrate about what some government halfway across the world does to their own population. But at the moment, the real urgent issue is basically a spreading war, which is
yes,
is not just in Iran. What's happening and of course there's Palestine, but also what's happening in Lebanon,
yep,
and of course in Sudan, which is
yep,
is all interrelated, and we have Cuba, Venezuela. We've got issues that are tantamount to threats, which are also war crimes against Colombia as well.
mm, mm.
So this is not a single issue. This is a broad imperialist war machine that we need to
Yeah,
address.
I think the point you make about this is an expression of imperialism. Absolutely, this is the US lashing out in in dramatic ways as it tries desperately to regain the initiative, to reassert its control over the world. People are, I mean, America it's a waning imperial power, but it's incredibly dangerous power at the moment. So, and that's why we see Trump lashing out all over the place, because I think Israel and the US have been caught out in their attack on Iran. Iran is not folding. Iran is determined to stand its ground. And because it's standing up to America successfully at the moment, the Trump is absolutely outraged and therefore lashing out in all directions. So a dangerous person, a dangerous state, the US state, and but a waning state. And
Mm.
and in that situation, we should be able to seize the initiative and build pressure to change our government's policy and contribute to this global anti-war movement which is developing.
Mm. So now there are actions happening around the country. A lot of them will probably be organised at last minute, as
Yep,
their as their want. So people should be checking out in their local region to see what could be happening this Saturday.
yep.
Um, However, what we know is in Tāmaki Makaurau, there's uh, the action is happening at 2 p.m. in Aotea Square.
Mm.
Um, in Pōneke, it's 11 a.m. and is it Civic Square? Is it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
And of course here in Ōtautahi, it's 1 p.m. at the Bridge of Remembrance, where we've got lots of speakers lined up and some music, and it will be an excellent time will be had by all.
yes.
Um, and this is, again, we are not going to achieve anything unless we show ourselves, unless we come out and say we are here.
Yep.
This is a big part of it. This is a presence, and people may feel that doing a rally in March doesn't achieve anything, but it is the base on which we build.
It is absolutely. Yep.
Yep. So, do you have any final words to say?
Well, my final words would be simply that we have to learn from the past. New Zealand's been here before. In the 1980s, for example, we had mass movements which made significant changes in our national policies, and it didn't come from politicians. I think we have to remember this: politicians never lead; they always follow. They follow public opinion. And I think what happened in the 1980s with our anti-nuclear policy, that was a grassroots movement which forced the prime minister of the day. He didn't want to, but it forced the prime minister of the day to reject US ships coming here under their neither confirm nor deny policy. And we got our anti-nuclear legislation. We got gay rights legislation through. We got big progress within the women's movement and big progress within the anti-apartheid movement, and they were all done through people's movements. So we won't get anywhere if we leave it to Winston Peters. We'll only get there if we mobilize, organize together, and in large numbers, and demand the changes from our government that we need.
All right. Thank you very much for that, John. And hopefully we may continue this if we have other reasons for doing it. And
Yep.
so keep your eyes open, and I will post further episodes as if and when the occasion arises. Thank you again.
Yep. Kia ora, Kieran. It's really nice to talk to you this morning.
Cheers. Cool. We'll call that the end.
Okay, now how do I get this to you?